The Nazis were one of the first ones to build some of the biggest and the deadliest pieces of military hardware in history. Adolf Hitler hired men like Werner von Braun, Ferdinand Porsche, Alfred Krupp to build huge terror machines, high-tech superguns and weapons of mass destruction. This would ultimately change the face of warfare and seal Germany's fate. So sit back guys as we roll down the list of the top 9 interesting facts on the Nazi Megaweapons propaganda.
Number 9. The V3 cannon.
Like the V1 cruise missile and the V2 rocket that preceded it, the V3 cannon, also known as the England cannon, was another so-called Nazi vengeance weapon. It was a massive supergun built directly into a hill and capable of firing artillery shells across the English Channel from the French border that targeted the cannons towards London, but it proved to be largely ineffectual, as out of the 142 rounds that landed, the V2 took the lives of only 10 people, wounding other 35.
Number 8. The Gustav rail cannons.
Speaking of big guns, the Nazis clearly had a massive idea for the big guns. These two 31.5-inch caliber German cannons were the absolute beast, and in fact they are the largest cannons the world have ever seen. Each of them had to be transported in several pieces, assembled and then mounted on a prepared emplacement, a procedure that required around 4,000 men. The Nazis deployed an entire anti-aircraft regiment to protect them, along with special troops to guard against the Partisan attacks. Of the two, only Gustav that were put into active service in the 1942, it only fired 42 shots, to which weapons expert Alexander Ludwig quotes that as a technological masterpiece, but says that they were basically a waste of material, technological expertise and manpower.
Number 7. The V1 missile.
The V1 missile, or the V1 flying bomb, also known to the Allies as the buzz bomb, because of its characteristic buzzing sound heard from miles apart and then suddenly dropped to demolish its targets. The guidance systems of the V1 is very similar to today's autopilot, developed by Scania in Berlin, was designed to regulate only airspeed and the altitude that was necessary for the missile to hit its target, which was primarily London at that time.
Number 6. The V2 rocket.
The A4 rockets, which is also known as the Vengeance or the V2 rockets, was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. The missile was a liquid propellant rocket engine developed during the Second World War in Germany as a vengeance weapon, assigned to attack Allied cities as a relation for the Allied bombing against Germany in the World War I. The V2 rocket also became the first artificial object to cross the boundary of space with a vertical launch on the 20th of June 1944.
Number 5. The Sun Gun.
Although this sounds more like something a movie villain would think up, but the Sun Gun was a theoretical orbital weapon that was researched by the Nazis during the wartime. The concept was first thought up in the year 1929 by the German physicist Hermann Oberth. He designed a space station from which a 100-meter wide concave mirror would be used to reflect sunlight onto a concentrated point on the Earth. But once the war began, the Americans had managed to capture an experimental model of the sun gun, but the weapon was never employed in the war due to its impracticality and out-of-reach concept, for that era at least.
Number 4. The Sonic Cannon.
Well, this sounds like the stuff of a science fiction, but during the war, Nazi engineers had managed to develop a sonic cannon that could literally shake a person apart from the inside, or at least that's what they claim. Designed by Dr. Richard Walshak, the cannon consisted of the dishes that were pulse detonated with the gases such as oxygen and methane at around 44 Hz, which were ignited to turn these gases into noise that could kill. These machines could inflict damage for about 300 yards by vibrating the middle ear bones. Apparently, the sound waves created pressure that could kill a man 50 meters away in half a minute with a lethal invisible blow.
Number 3. The Panzer Maus tanks.
Completed in the late 1944, this super heavy tank holds the title for being the heaviest tank ever built. Weighing around a colossal 188 tons, this mega weapon ended up bringing the downfall for Hitler's men. There was simply no engine powerful enough that would have powered these enormous beasts to an acceptable speed. In the end, the Maus proved to be too costly to produce, and thus only 2 were ever built, and one of which was never completed.
Number 2. The U-boats.
U-boats were famous for hunting their targets in groups known as the wolf packs, which would engage the enemy as a single deadly unit, much like their animal counterparts. U-boats were most heavily used in the Battle of Atlantic, a campaign to siege control over the supply routes in and out of America that lasted throughout the war period. Also, the only U-boat that ever remains intact today is model U-995. This vessel is on display at Laboe Naval Memorial in Schleswig-Holstein, Germany.
Number 1. The Last Forfeit.
On one side, Americans have claimed victory over Germany, and on the other side, 2 Nazi German submarines declined to surrender when Berlin fell and instead remained submerged for 2 long months before making a landing in Argentina. One also said to have offloaded a Nazi officer before even being detected. Hi guys, Infinito here. I hope you have enjoyed the video. If so, do smash the like button and feel free to subscribe, and stay tuned till I get back to you next week on a Thursday with a completely new video. Till